Hey there everybody, it's Alex here from VG247, and here is a bit of Spider-Man Miles Morales, which is a very typical sort of console launch title. By which I mean, it's impressive in places, but it's clearly still rummaging about in the remnants of the last generation. It's a shorter experience, which will surely have made that new generation development easier. And it's also content-rich enough that it's the ideal sort of relaxing binge that you can use to ease yourself into your new hardware. The big question, I guess, is, did you play 2018 Spider-Man on PS4? Because if you did, you'll already have a pretty good idea of how you're going to feel about Miles Morales. It's a game running on the same technology, it's got a lot of the same game systems and mechanics. Now, Miles as a character is just different enough from Peter Parker to be distinct, but he's ultimately still Spider-Man, so things aren't going to be that different. So that means you're still going around New York, just as in the 2018 game, and it's essentially the same open world, though just at a different time of year. So Miles Morales is a Christmas story, but it sadly really doesn't do enough with the time of year to make it feel like Christmas is central to the narrative. That's a shame, because I love when media does that. The quintessential example, of course, is Die Hard, though even in games, a mediocre game like Dead Rising 4 was enhanced by its sort of Black Friday, Christmas sort of setting. Still, the icy decorated New York is at least pretty, and if you get this on Christmas, you'll find things seasonal enough. Now, playing this game basically breaks into a few categories. First of all, there's open world roaming, so you're swinging, you're running, you're clambering, you're mantling around the towering buildings of New York. It still feels great. Miles has his own unique way of moving and swinging that differentiates him from Peter, but it's largely the same as the previous game. Now, traversal's fun, but obviously it's used to get from point to point, right? Now, that's for story missions and side quests, primarily, and they're your main points of call, but there's also a grab bag of shorter, friendly neighbourhood quests that you pick up through your cell phone, and then there's also the randomly generated, endlessly repeating crimes from the 2018 game back again, and they'll pop up as you're travelling through the game world, and you can divert yourself to them if you want a challenge. Finally, there's of course a range of collectibles to pick up, which in turn feed your character upgrades and up your completion percentage. All of this is pretty similar to 2018 Spider-Man, though there are slight presentation changes to better fit the Miles character. The same is true of combat, so it's still that rhythmic, combo and dodge heavy superhero battling that was first sort of coined by the Batman Arkham games, and there's still stealth segments that similarly borrow from the Caped Crusader. But Miles has unique powers that set his Spider-Man apart from the one you played as in the previous game. So, the two most important of these differences are Miles has bioelectric venom powers and the ability to turn invisible. The venom powers let you empower attacks with electric, and then those electric zaps can spread between enemies and leave them more vulnerable to other attacks, and it just all plays into the combos you can pull off and the ways you have to lock groups of enemies down. Turning invisible is obviously pretty obvious. You can do it straight in front of enemies to freak them out, but also it just makes stealth more fun and viable. So you can do things now like turn invisible, zip down to take someone out, and zip back up before your invisibility expires. And that's really, really cool. The camouflage is limited, but it definitely opens up a lot of new possibilities. So like I said earlier, Miles feels sufficiently different enough to Pete to be defined, but similar enough that everything that worked about the 2018 Spider-Man remains completely intact. It's lightly iterative in a way that perhaps wouldn't go over so well in a fully fledged sequel, but this is pretty much understood that it's more of a stopgap spin-off sort of game. Speaking of that, let's talk about the size of the game. So, the comparison that's been made in the past to something like Uncharted Lost Legacy is actually pretty fair. So, the core story probably takes a similar sort of time, so that's the 7 to 10 hour range, and I polished off most of the side content as well, and my total completion percentage was 97%. That took me a little over 12 hours, which to me felt just right. Now, the next generation nature of this game means that it does have a discount price, compared to most new next generation releases, but it's also more expensive than a similarly priced PS4 generation game like Lost Legacy was in 2017. So take from that what you will in terms of what you think that means about the value of the game. The story told here is also keen to emphasise the differences between the original Spider-Man and the new one. So Miles is really well realised, he's got a believable range of supporting characters around him. Great pride is taken in his status as a mixed-race hero from African American and Puerto Rican heritage, and as a biracial person myself, it's rare and exciting to see that represented well in video games. Also, completing one particular line of side quests leads to a brief but really prominent Black Lives Matter tribute, which is surprising and pleasing to see in a big budget mainstream video game. Now, this is a PlayStation 5 launch game, but it's also coming to PS4, of course. I haven't tested the PS4 version, but I assume it's fine. It'll lack the PS5 exclusive improvements, but Spider-Man ran well on PS4 in 2018, and this game is so similar to it that it's unlikely to have any major performance issues. As a PS5 launch title, Miles Morales is sort of a classic day one game. Like, exclusive or not, launch titles are often ported from the previous generation and just sort of prettied up for the next generation, and this feels like that. But what's impressive is how the core features of the PS5 sort of neatly slot into the proceedings without feeling disruptive or over the top or tacked on. So the blazing fast SSD storage means that loads are stupidly fast. Fast travel is no longer a chore because it's pretty much instant, like the little animations of Spider-Man on the subway are redundant in the PS5 version. And of course the silky smooth performance in 4K with HDR and all that. And then there's the ray tracing. I want to say also the haptic feedback and adaptive triggers are used, but they're so subtly used in this particular game that you don't notice them very much compared to something like Astro's Playroom. Ray tracing seems to be the feature that's most excited the developers at Insomniac, because it's absolutely everywhere in this game. It's got a really good implementation of ray tracing as well. Like, if you stop for a moment and cling to the side of a skyscraper and just take in how real-time reflections of New York are painted onto its big window panes, you're gonna be impressed. Some of Miles' spider suits also have surfaces that show up ray traced reflections as well, and that looks great when he's in motion. In fact, the ray tracing probably goes a long way to make this game, that is basically a PS4 game, feel more like a next generation game. The key character models are gorgeous, for instance, and they're impressive, but they're not that dissimilar to stuff we've been seeing through the PS4 generation. The real-time lighting, however, just enhances the whole world. It kicks everything up a notch. And honestly, that's it. Like, I reiterate again, how much did you like the 2018 Spider-Man? Because if you loved it, this is more of the same and you're going to love this. If you never played it, then this is a fun, engaging, open-world hero game. It's relatively untaxing. It's really the gaming equivalent of a popcorn action flick. It's comfort food, just like the 2018 game. And of course, if you didn't like the 2018 game, you're probably going to want to give this a miss. Now, the X factor is the price, which for some of you might be too rich for what is essentially a beefed up expansion pack. Launch games are rarely remembered as earth-shattering experiences years later, but at the time, elements of them always do feel magical. So, on the PS5, Miles Morales has both of those feelings down. Like, it's familiar and unsurprising, so I don't expect we'll be talking about it loads in years to come, but some of its technical presentation will wow you nevertheless, here and now. So if you're picking up a PS5 on launch day, this is surely one of the titles you're going to want to grab. And that's it from me for today. Don't forget to give us a like, give us a subscribe, ring the bell, all that stuff really helps. There's plenty more PS5 and Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S videos coming from us here on VG247, and if you do those things, you will be among the first to see them. There's a written review of this game on VG247.com, so hit up the website if you want to read a more in-depth presentation. But until next time, everyone, that's it from me. See ya.